Hey guys, very good morning. Today we are going to discuss character study Ruth. We all know, right? Meaning of name. Elimelech means my God is king, and Naomi means pleasant or love and lovely, and Mara means bitter. Mahlon means puni, and Chilio means pinning and sickly, and finally Ruth means friend. Wow, what a beautiful meaning. And ancestry and family life. Ruth was a Moabitess. She was a Gentile, hated by most Jews since they worshipped foreign gods and were unclean. The second one, generally when a foreigner married a believer, the foreigner dragged the unbeliever down into idolatry. Third one is Ruth was the opposite, and she assimilated into Jewish culture and accepted the true God as her own. The fourth one is she gave up her own country, people and gods in order to follow her mother-in-law back to Israel. Later she married Boaz and became an ancestor of both David and Jesus. When and where she lived. She began her life in Moab, an enemy of Israel. These two countries often fought together. Eventually she moved to Israel. Ruth lived approximately 1000 BC. Yes, BC. She lived during the time of the judges, and this was a tumultuous time in Israel. There were wars continuously. No king or authority ruled over the land. It was as if there was no law and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. During this time period, the people followed the custom of levirate marriages. This meant that if a woman's husband died, leaving her childless, the husband's brother or closest male relative had the responsibility of marrying her to raise up an heir for the deceased. Land rights were also passed on under this custom, and land was supposed to stay in the family from generation to generation. God also had laid down laws for the provision of the poor. Those with fields were to leave the corners unharvested so that the poor could come and harvest a small portion for food. This provided for the poor and also made it so they had to work for their own food. Training and occupation. No specific information. Ruth was probably a housewife, as most were at the time, and the death of her husband forced her to go out in the fields and glean for a living. Place in history. Ruth is known as one of the most godly women in the Bible. God honored her decision to leave her own country, and she is one of the most prominent women in David's and Jesus' genealogy. Special traits. No special abilities are mentioned, but it is special that she was one of a very few Gentiles in the entire Old Testament that gave up their own lifestyle, people, country, and idols in order to follow God. Weaknesses. There are no discernible weaknesses in her life from the text, though she obviously must have had some and many. Strengths. Numerous strengths can be seen in Ruth's life. When you look at chapter 3 verse 11, Boaz said, "For all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence." When we look at Proverbs chapter 22 verse 1, Ruth was respected for being a godly woman, which is better than being famous or wealthy. The first one, strengths, loyalty. This proclamation is probably the deepest expression of loyalty in the Old Testament. Ruth was willing to give up everything she knew in order to follow Naomi into a foreign country. Her family, her people, her home, her country, her gods, her position in society, Gentiles were normally looked down on in Jewish society, and her chance to be remarried. The second one is obedience. Ruth followed her mother-in-law's advice down to the letter. She didn't trust herself, her own opinion, or her feelings, but followed the older and wiser Naomi, even in such an important matter. The third one is love. Ruth showed great love to her mother-in-law. At any point in time, she could have left Naomi and pursued her own goals, but she didn't. She cared and provided for Naomi to such an extent that it was well known throughout the town. The people even said Ruth was better than 7 sons to Naomi. And the fourth one is diligence. Ruth was a very diligent young woman. She went out to the fields to harvest food both for herself and Naomi. She worked hard throughout the days to sustain them. She didn't sit and wait for help to come to her and Naomi, even though they were poor. Important acts and events. Important acts and events in her life were leaving Moab, marrying Boaz, and giving birth to Obed, the grandfather of David. Lessons from her life. Of course, we can learn from all of the strengths in her life, but there are other lessons we can learn from as well. The first one is God always cares for believers and always honors their decisions to follow Him and put Him first. Ruth made a huge sacrifice to do what was right. God blessed her for that. These blessings don't always come on this earth, but for her and Naomi they did. God never forgets His children or forsakes them. Second one is skin and race is not important in God's sight. Historically, many people, even believers, have placed a high emphasis on skin color and ethnicity. It is not important in God's sight. Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. Don't let people's outward appearance affect our judgment of them. So, very great statement, right? I hope you can understand this character study. God bless you. Thank you.